Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in Paris. These are the stories that set your agenda. The euro and French bond futures under pressure after a leftist alliance seizes a shock victory in France's election, stoking concerns about political instability. More Democrats call on Joe Biden to step down as the party's nominee, but the president is defiant ahead of hosting NATO leaders in Washington. And reformist Masoud Pezeshkian is elected Iran's president. We'll look at the potential impact on Iran's nuclear deal with the West. But as we check the markets, it is France and the electoral shock that's come through that will be rippling through these markets as investors try to get clarity on what this means for the future of France, particularly when it comes to debt and spending. We check in then. European futures currently pointing to very, very modest gains. After the gains of last week, European stocks ended higher. Currently, European futures pointed very modest gains at just 2 points so far. We look, of course, at CAC futures and try to understand the consequences for the sovereign debt of France as well, and the implications there. To what extent is a risk premium going to be priced in now, given the deadlock we are seeing across the National Assembly of France? S&P futures currently pointing lower by 0.2%, a fresh record, of course, set by US stocks by the end of close on Friday. Non-farm payrolls data part of that picture. Nasdaq futures pointed to losses of around 0.2%. Let's flip the board and look cross-asset then, and we check in on OATs, the sovereign debt of France. A bit of pressure coming through, of course, in terms of how markets are starting to price in this surprise gain that's come through for the leftist grouping, of course. Macron's party coming in second, and the National Front actually coming in third in terms of numbers of seats. Euro-dollar, of course, in focus for us today, under a bit of pressure at 108, down 0.1%. There's the Oates picture. And in terms of US 10-years, we look ahead to testimony from Jay Powell and CPI inflation data out of the US on Thursday. Currently 4.29 on the US 10-year, $86 a barrel on Brent, down 0.1%. Some important reports out of the IEA and OPEC as well out later this week. Continue to keep an eye on the tropical storm Beryl as it heads towards Texas. Now, back to what's unfolding here in France. Set for political deadlock then, and gridlock after that surprise win by the left-wing coalition in this weekend's legislative election. Pollsters had seen Marine Le Pen's National Rally winning the most seats, but the far-right party came third behind Emmanuel Macron's centrist alliance.
A majority has made a different choice for the country. From now on, the will of the people must be strictly respected. From now on, no subterfuge, arrangement, or combination will be acceptable. The lessons of the vote are irrefutable. The defeat of the President of the Republic and his coalition is clearly confirmed.
We will be in a position to have an absolute majority, maybe in a year. France is going to be totally deadlocked, with 3 groups of roughly equal size in the National Assembly. So that's the way to go. It's unfortunate we will lose another year, but if that's what it takes, well, then that's what it takes.
Tonight, the political faction I represented in this campaign, even though it performed 3 times better than predicted in the last weeks, did not attain a majority. Thus, loyal to the Republican tradition and in tune with my principles, I will hand the President of the Republic my resignation tomorrow morning.
Okay, ending there with Gabriel Attal, the outgoing Prime Minister, handing in his resignation. Let's get more then in terms of the details and bring in Bloomberg's Caroline Conard, standing by on set with me here in Paris on the details. And this is historic and this is unprecedented for France. How did we get here, Caroline?
Yeah, this hasn't happened in the Fifth Republic. So since 1958, this is the first time no one is getting an absolute majority in the National Assembly. We have a hung parliament scenario. Just a few days ago, we were thinking this is going to be an outright majority for the National Rally. And in fact, it was a huge disappointment for Marine Le Pen. They only get 140 seats, which is much lower than what we expected. Instead, the left wing coming first. And then second, also Macron's party actually did much better than expected. So clearly, this is unprecedented. We're entering uncharted territory. And Macron will still have to see whether he can actually form a wide coalition. You heard the far-left leader, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, saying he was ready to govern, ready to implement the entire program, but that obviously remains to be seen because even the left doesn't have the majority.
Yeah, the firebrand of Mélenchon was on form yesterday with that speech, but as you say, saying he's not going to make any compromises. So whether or not Macron can reach out to the Socialists, the Greens, and carve out some kind of majority to govern, you need to be above that 289 within the 577 seat National Assembly. So what are the next steps then, Caroline?
So there is no deadline for the President Emmanuel Macron to appoint the next Prime Minister. However, we have a few dates in front of us. We have the Paris Olympics, that's coming in just a couple of weeks. We also have on July 18 the next National Assembly with all these MPs elected last night reconvening for the first time. So if Gabriel Attal, for example, stayed in place until then, he could potentially then face a vote of no confidence. Now, Macron will probably over the next few days try and look towards the center left, but that's assuming that the union of the left explodes and the far left is sidelined, because the far left only gets about 75 seats within this union of the left. So there was actually an interesting poll last night saying that moderate left and Macron together, that's about 300 seats, and that's about a majority.
And that you would have thought might be market friendly if they can carve out and push back on what's coming from France Unbound, the more extreme, some would say, left part of that grouping. Caroline, thank you very much indeed. We'll have Caroline back in the show, of course, to talk us through the implications of this historic outcome, of course, for the people of France and the National Assembly. Let's get to the market reaction then to all of this. Traders, of course, digesting this election result here in France, with the euro slipping in early trade and bond futures also, of course, in the spotlight. For more, let's bring in our MLive strategist, Mary Nicola. Mary, talk to us about the market reaction then. I've read two different takes on this. JP Morgan saying there will be additional risk premium demanded of French assets, but we have others like Evercore ISI saying, actually, this is pretty benign for the markets. Talk us through the reaction on the euro so far in terms of these results coming through from France.
Yeah, there's no question that there's going to take some time for traders to digest the news. First off is the fact that you had the left alliance winning more than expected, which wasn't really priced in. That's one factor. The second factor is that no alliance has a clear majority. So, of course, it's going to take some time to form a government, and how the formation of that government takes hold is going to take some time. So in the meantime, you're going to see pressure on the euro. You're going to see pressure on French bonds and equities until that election uncertainty wanes a little bit. But for now, it looks like it's going to have to, the election risks are likely to prevail, keeping euro on the back foot, not only against the dollar, but also against sterling.
OK, euro likely on the back foot until we get some more clarity in terms of what unfolds, what kind of coalitions are cobbled together, if there are any, across the National Assembly of France. So switching focus now, Mary, to the US, a big week in terms of what we're expected to hear from Jay Powell, of course, giving testimony, and then the inflation data out of the US on the back of a non-farm payroll sprint that suggested there is further cooling in this labour market. What are you going to be watching for as markets adjust and start to price in a full 50 basis points now in terms of cuts from the Fed?
Yeah, even after we saw the reaction from the non-farm payroll on Friday, so you saw a softer average hourly earnings. You saw that unemployment rate has risen slightly. So, of course, there's going to be that inclination that the Fed could start cutting sooner than expected. Markets are now moving in to price in about an 80% chance of a cut as soon as September. And, of course, if we hear Jay Powell citing his concerns about the slowdown in activity, the increase in the unemployment rate, and then, of course, progress on the inflation front, then of course we can see these tailwinds coming through for bonds and that bond rally to actually continue. So, and then of course we can potentially see another additional markets going a little bit further in terms of pricing rate cuts. So it really will come down to what Powell says and the testimony that he gives on how he sees things unfolding, and what potentially he sets the stage for September and thereafter.
Okay, M-Life strategist Mary Nicola, thank you very much indeed in terms of the market reaction to the French election results and, of course, what to expect from the testimony from Jay Powell and also the inflation data coming out on Thursday, of course, stateside. Let's cross over to Asia now, where Avril Hong is standing by in Singapore for a check in the Asian markets. Avril.
Yeah, Tom, it's really interesting how we saw a bit of risk off early in the session, perhaps the election noise from Europe causing jitters in this part of the world. But markets focus now seems to be shifting towards what Jay Powell has to say in Congress later this week, as Mary was just outlining. If we see that reinforcement of the deflationary narrative, that could be something that's supportive for Asia currencies, including the yen. We're seeing a bit of a climb on the Japanese currency, but also for riskier assets such as stocks. Today, we're seeing the likes of the TAIEX getting an added boost from a climb in TSMC towards a record high after Morgan Stanley upgraded its price target. But as you can see here, I wanted to highlight the underperformance in Chinese equities. Now, among the things that might be driving this, along with the weakness in the Chinese economy, is also this idea that we're getting Chinese authorities stepping in increasingly to not just the currency market, but also the bond markets. Today, saying that they will add those temporary repurchase operations, flip the board if you can. And this seems to add to the signal that, the risk premium has got to come from somewhere. That seems to be why equities are bearing the brunt of it today on the 10-year, move almost to 2 basis points on the Chinese government bond yields. But don't forget, we also have inflation numbers due out of China later in the week. And if we see a low number, we could see this bond selling easily reverse. Tom.
Avril Hong in Singapore with a check on the Asian markets. Thank you very much indeed. Let's get you up to speed on what else is on the docket then this week. As we mentioned, Tuesday, Jay Powell, of course, of the Fed testifying, and that testimony will continue into Wednesday, of course. As Mary Nicola was pointing out, markets now price in an 80% chance of a September cut from the Federal Reserve. The non-farm payrolls data certainly fed into that, and unemployment ticking up 4.1%, and the wage growth cooling as well. Thursday, you get inflation data. This will also, of course, be consequential in terms of how the markets are starting to price in that September cut. Whether that feeds into that narrative or pushes back on that, then expected to come down in terms of the headline year on year to around 3.1% from 3.3% in terms of CPI. And then on Friday, Wall Street Bank earnings kicking off. So starting, of course, the earnings season with the banking sector on the front foot. You've got JP Morgan, Citigroup, Wells also all kicking off in terms of the earnings coming through on Friday. So we'll look ahead to that. You can get around, of course, the stories you need to know to get your day going in today's edition of Daybreak. Terminal subscribers can go to DAYB Go, of course, on the terminal. Coming up, Joe Biden doubles down after more House Democrats call for him to step aside. We're going to have the details on that story next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now, Boeing is to plead guilty to a criminal fraud charge tied to the 737 MAX crashes. For more, let's go to our Asia transport reporter, Danny Lee. Danny, what do we know at this point in terms of the rationale for Boeing pleading guilty, and where does this take the company going forward?
Yeah, Boeing is pleading guilty to criminal conspiracy to defraud the United States, and that's after the Justice Department it came to a view that Boeing had not adhered to an earlier settlement in relation to two 737 MAX crashes back in 2018 and 2019, which killed 346 people. What this now does is leave Boeing open to a criminal fine of up to almost $500 million. The fine itself will be determined by a judge according to the Justice Department. And as part of pleading guilty, what it means is it has to invest $455 million in compliance and safety programs, and it has to install a corporate monitor. But the alternative for Boeing was to take this to a criminal trial, and the spectre of that, having that out in open court, would be unpalatable because Boeing's leadership is still in limbo. Its finances are in disarray. But with this being settled, it's a good thing for Boeing to clear this off its decks. The question is just to what level of fine that it will be hit with. But for the families of the two fatal 737 MAX crashes. They wanted a fine of $25 billion. So it's a big gulf, and whether the judge will listen to the families of those victims to hear their case will be another matter.
OK, Asia Transport reporter Danny Lee, thank you very much indeed on the latest in terms of Boeing and its decision to seemingly take the fine rather than go through, of course, the travails of a prolonged court case. We'll see, of course, if that unfolds as they expect. Now, to the politics of the US, and more House Democrats have said they want Joe Biden to step aside as the party's White House nominee. But the US president vowed to stay on in the race. An exclusive interview with ABC's George Stephanopoulos. Take a listen.
I'm the guy that put NATO together, the future. No one thought I could expand it. I'm the guy that shoved Putin down. No one thought could happen. Who's going to be able to hold NATO together like me? If the Lord Almighty came out and said, Joe, get out of the race, I'll get out of the race. The Lord Almighty's not coming down.
OK, let's bring in Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta for the latest then. Kriti, how is Biden polling at this point? What are the poll numbers looking like for him?
Well, the bar for success for this interview with George Stephanopoulos on ABC, Tom, was that he had to close that 7-8 point gap between him and President Trump that followed in his poor debate performance. And he did just that. So by that measure, it is success. But he is still polling behind President Trump in 6 out of the 8 swing states. He's only higher than President Trump in blue states like Michigan and Wisconsin as well. So the polling numbers are looking good. But this is really where his campaign is going to be putting a lot of emphasis for the next couple of days and arguably months going into that November 5th election. The idea here is that they're actually talking about an aggressive traveling schedule over the next few weeks to, one, prove that President Biden is fully capable of executing that, and second, simply the idea that he has a lot of work to do, specifically when it comes to Pennsylvania. That's where he has the largest gap with President Trump, 7 points of a laggard.
Wow, 7 points in Pennsylvania. In terms of the Democrats and the noise that we hear about members of the House and Senate as well, but mostly members of the House, trying to form some kind of coalition to force him out, what is the process there? How challenging will that effort be, Kriti?
Pretty challenging, Tom, and I think it all starts off with just the way that this process works. Look, he is the incumbent. It is a rarity throughout history that the incumbent president on either side of the aisle does not rerun for a second term. That being said, there is a way to do it, but the incumbent has to step down first. And the way it works, going into the nitty-gritty here, Tom, bear with me, is that a candidate has to win the support from the majority of delegates at the Democratic National Committee. Now, there is a story in the byline, or some rules within the bylines of the DNC, that if you are the incumbent, those delegates are already pledged to support you. And in the last year, President Biden has won 99% of the nearly 4,000 delegates. So he's kind of already got it in the bag from the DNC. Any move or any kind of succumbing to pressure really has to come from President Biden. As we heard at the top of the segment, it doesn't look like that's happening anytime soon.
OK, Kriti Gupta, thank you very much indeed. We can, of course, continue to monitor how Biden adjusts to this pressure in the hours and days ahead. Kriti with the latest. We appreciate it. Coming up, switching focus to Iran, that country electing a reformist as its next president. We're going to break down the challenges that he will face. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now to some other stories making news this Monday. Protesters rallied in Israel yesterday, marking 9 months since the war in Gaza started. They are calling for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to step down and for a ceasefire to bring back hostages still held by Hamas. Truce talks advanced last week after reports that Hamas had broadly agreed to a US proposed ceasefire plan. And Iran has elected a reformist president keen on restarting talks with the US over a landmark nuclear deal. Let's bring in Horizon's Middle East anchor and Africa anchor, Jumana Pasechi, with the details. Jumana, how much of a surprise was this that the political mechanics of Iran allowed a reformist to be elected?
Yeah, that's right, Tom. So I would say it certainly is somewhat of a surprise. And if you bear in mind that going into these presidential elections, every single candidate had to be vetted by the so-called Guardian Council. Mr. Pezeshkian was the only so-called quote-unquote reformist candidate to make it through. And the fact that he went on to win by a margin of 3 million votes versus the hardliner candidate, Mr. Jalili, is quite indicative of a public that is looking for change. However, I do want to point out that turnout at these elections has been historically low. The first round only got about 40% of a turnout. Second round, very close to 50%, which is the lowest number in history for Iranian presidential elections, and really underscores just how much distrust there is in this electoral cycle, and is really going to be one of the key challenges that Mr. Pezeshkian is going to be facing at the beginning of his term, simply because distrust in the system is running at very high levels. And of course, he has been painted as a reformist candidate, but I think it was noteworthy yesterday that in his acceptance speech, he thanked the Supreme Leader, Mr. Khamenei, for his support, and he said that he's looking forward to implementing policies put forward by the Supreme Leader and to a continuation of his predecessor, President Raisi, who of course was killed in that helicopter crash. Now, one of the key elements that he's talked about is looking to engage once more again with the West. And as you know, Iran's economy has been crippled by heavy sanctions imposed by the West, by the U.S., and the fact that President Trump pulled out of that nuclear deal back in 2018. And on the back of that, what you have seen is a steady degradation of the Iranian economy. The new president is coming in and he's saying we need a new, fresh pair of eyes, and perhaps we look forward to opening a new wave of discussions with the West. But how far he's going to go and how reformist the Ayatollah is going to allow him to be is a big question.
OK, you've really important context around that reformist label. What has the reaction been then from the international community so far, Jemina?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anyone to hear that one of the first congratulatory messages to come through was from President Putin in Russia. He congratulated the new president, saying that he looks forward to closer cooperation within the two countries. Iran and Russia have always enjoyed good relations, he said. Saudi Arabia, also one of the first countries to congratulate, both from the king and the crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, sending along a congratulatory message. That is key because they only recently restored diplomatic relations a couple of years ago. The EU, a bit more cautious with their own messaging. A spokesperson for the Foreign Affairs Department tweeted, "We're ready to engage with the new government in line with the EU policy of critical engagement." And then the big one, the US, no official comment out of President Biden, but what we did get was a remark out of a spokesperson saying that the elections won't have a significant impact on our approach. Our concerns about Iran's behavior are unchanged. And of course, they're talking about the fact that Iran have actually continued with their uranium enrichment program. They're very close to a bomb-grade level of enrichment, which is a warning, a signal to the rest of the world, and is also why many less hawkish parts of the administration are looking to perhaps re-engage with talks with Iran. But again, all of that could change with the U.S. elections if President Trump does come back come November.
Really, really fascinating. Horizons Middle East and Africa anchor Jemina Pasechi on the latest out of Iran and the implications on the international stage as well. Now, of course, what is unfolding in the Middle East ties into what's happening in the oil market. We check in on oil right now because there's also an eye on Tropical Storm Beryl as that bears down on Texas. We know that the oil industry there is bracing for that as well. Also, importantly, OPEC and the IEA will be releasing reports in terms of the demand, the surplus story in terms of oil later this week as well. Keep an eye on the price. Plenty more coming up in terms of a deep dive on what's happening here in France next. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in Paris. These are the stories that set your agenda. The euro and French bond futures under pressure after a leftist alliance seizes a shock victory in France's election, stoking concerns about political instability. More Democrats call on Joe Biden to step down as the party's nominee, but the president is defiant ahead of hosting NATO leaders in Washington. And reformist Masoud Pezeshkian is elected Iran's president. We're going to look at the potential impact in Iran's nuclear deal with the West. The markets, though, right now focused, of course, on the National Assembly of France and that shock result coming through. No, it was not the National Rally and Marine Le Pen's party coming in top. In fact, they came in third. It was the group of leftist parties scoring the biggest number of seats. So now the horse trading begins in terms of whether or not they can form some kind of coalition. We'll get all the details. Caroline Gornau shortly, of course, has been monitoring this for us. But the markets are on edge over the politics of France, obviously, given the surprise that's come through in terms of the new Popular Front and their gains in the National Assembly. The FTSE 100 futures, just briefly looking at that, currently flat. We have the BOE in focus in terms of a couple of speakers, Hugh Pill and Catherine Mann speaking later this week. Keep an eye on that. In terms of the European futures, then currently pointing lower by about 0.1%. European stocks did manage to grind out gains last week. Today, though, they seem to be slightly on the back foot, largely on the back of what's happening here in France. S&P futures currently down 0.1%. Nasdaq futures also pointing lower by 30 points. But the context is that the S&P burst through a fresh record by the end of the close on Friday. Let's flip the board then and look cross-asset. Euro dollar at 108, the single currency under pressure, down 0.1%. Currently looking at a little bit of selling pressure as well coming through for French sovereign debt. JP Morgan says that investors will now be demanding a wider spread over the German counterparts. We continue, of course, to keep an eye on OATs. 429 in terms of the US, the benchmark there as we lead up to that testimony from Jay Powell and the inflation data on Thursday out of the US. And we keep an eye on oil, $86 a barrel as Tropical Storm Beryl heads towards Texas, currently down 0.2%. Now, French markets are on edge, as I mentioned, after the new Popular Front. The new Popular Front, that's the Left Alliance, secured the most seats in Sunday's parliamentary elections. President Macron's centrist alliance came second. That was not expected. The far-right National Rally had been forecast to win, of course, the poll, but in a shock reversal came in third. Let's get more then from Bloomberg's Caroline Gornau in terms of what fed into these results. And we'll start there because it is historic, it is unprecedented for France, and clearly the moves last week to pull some candidates played in the favour of Macron, played in the favour, of course, the new Popular Front, to the detriment of National Rally. And you could see how angry some of their leaders were yesterday, talking about the unnatural alliance between those two groups. How do we get there? Where do we go from here, Caroline?
Of course, some of them were a bit skeptical last week that this so-called Republican front would actually work to block the National Rally and to prevent them from getting an outright majority. But in the end, you had more than 200 candidates who pulled out of the race. So a lot of left-wing and Macron supporters actually voted for the candidate facing the National Rally. And in the end, the National Rally did pretty poorly, 140 seats. First came the new Popular Front. What's interesting is to actually look at exactly how many members of the far left are within this new Popular Front. About 75 out of 180. So we'll see if this new Popular Front actually stays together. Mélenchon said, we're ready to govern, we're ready to stay together, and we're ready to implement the full, very costly program. We'll see if that's actually the case, or whether it splits, and then Macron reaches out to the more moderate part of this left wing.
Because what you're highlighting is really important, is the makeup of this new Popular Front. It's a fairly unwieldy coalition of socialists, communists, Greens, France Unbowed. So we'll see how that and whether or not that holds, as you say. In terms of the business community of France, and we'll get on to in terms of some of their policy priorities, but the business community of France, you've been speaking to them in the run-up, of course, to this crucial vote. What have we been hearing from executives and business leaders in France?
I mean, generally, for the past 7 years, President Macron has had a very strong economic grip on the country. He was seen as pro-business, champion of reform, pension reform, labor reform, even though he did abandon the unemployment benefits reform. Over the weekend in X, there was a lot of anxiety that this was the end of this era, that we were looking at a new beginning, whatever it is. In fact, if you look at the new Popular Front, the Institut Montaigne is saying their measures could cost as much as 179 billion euros. extra on top of the current deficit we already have. So, of course, there was a wait-and-see attitude, there was some anxiety, but clearly, this is going to be a new beginning and possibly some more fiscal slippage. In fact, what we have to look at now is the budget in the fall. Whoever becomes prime minister will have to deal with this budget and possibly face a vote of no confidence in the fall.
Yeah, at some point they have to go to the European Commission and present their plans for reducing that deficit, maybe by 20 to 30 billion, which is in contrast to what we've been hearing from the New Popular Front. One thing that really stood out to me watching the French commentary on TV yesterday was that both the left and the right seem to be aligned on one thing, which is reversing the reforms around pensions in here and retirement age, which was key, wasn't it, for Macron?
And the New Popular Front actually wants to lower the retirement age to 60. Just last year, Macron raised the retirement age from 62 to 64. So we'll see exactly what this means and whether these measures are implemented.
Caroline Connell, thank you very much indeed, with the granular take on how the politics of France has unfolded. Historic here, unprecedented, and of course we watch to see what combinations could be put together in the National Assembly of France. We're going to get plenty more, of course, on the French election results and market reaction with top guests, of course, through the morning. We're going to get insights from Tycho Cantrium and Jacques Delors Institute and Edmond de Rothschild as well. Now to the politics of the US. Joe Biden vowing to stay in the race after more congressional Democrats called for the president to step aside as the party's nominee. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta with the latest. Kriti, we've also had our own poll put together by Bloomberg, and that demonstrates that in some areas Biden is holding up quite well. Tie all this together for us.
He's holding up quite well in 2 out of the 8 swing states, Michigan and Wisconsin in particular. But these are, of course, Democrat-heavy states regardless. Where the real kind of success is the fact that he's narrowed the gap with several of the other swing states as well from President Trump. Remember, before, or actually right after the debate performance, or his poor debate performance, I should say, you did see a 6 to 7 point lag between President Trump and Biden. That has now been closed to as much as 5, even 4 points in certain parts of the country. If you look overall, of course, as you were seeing on your screen, it's about a 2-point difference, 47% to 45% for Trump versus Biden, respectively. What really is the crucial question, though, is whether or not he can continue to campaign and continue to repair some of the damage that has been done. Yes, the gap is narrowing, but can it take over, I should say, President Trump's polling numbers? That seems to be the question. That's where so much of the concern from the Democratic Party is coming from.
OK, Kriti Gupta, thank you very much indeed with the latest in terms of the polling and the implications for President Joe Biden. To the UK now, where Rachel Reeves will give her first major speech as Chancellor of the Exchequer today. Reeves will lay out the new Labour government's plans to spur private investment. Bloomberg's Alex Morgan reports.
Thank you.
The UK has a Labour Prime Minister for the first time in 14 years and a female Chancellor for the first time ever. But who are Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves? Keir Starmer's only been an MP since 2015. Prior to that, he was a lawyer, rising to become the top prosecutor in England and Wales. He joined the former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet, appointed the shadow Brexit secretary in 2016. He took over the leadership in 2020, following Labour's crushing defeat at the hands of Boris Johnson. He spent the last 4 years pulling Labour back to the centre ground. Rachel Reeves is a former Bank of England economist. She's been on something of a charm offensive to win over business and the city, both of which are traditionally seen as more friendly to Britain's Conservatives. Her model rests on a blend of self-reliance in key areas such as energy, while seeking to reduce trade barriers. Plans include a new publicly owned energy company, closing tax loopholes for the wealthy and ending exemptions for private schools. Still, Britain is struggling to grow and has a massive debt hangover. That's the inheritance Starmer and Reeves will be facing, which could well tie their hands in the next Parliament.
And Alex Morgan joins us now with some more details in terms of what to expect from the Chancellor today. What are the top lines then, Alex, that we should be looking for from Chancellor of the Exchequer Rachel Reeves when she gives that speech later today?
Well, good morning to you, Tom. Rachel Reeves, as I was saying just there, obviously it's a historic moment. The first female Chancellor, the first woman to occupy this post in the UK. And really the sense you're getting from Reeves, from Starmer and this new administration is they want to be seen hitting the ground running. So Rachel Reeves, got a top line, if you like, the national mission, she's described it as, is boosting growth. Rachel Reeves making it clear that the way this government are going to seek to avoid tax hikes or public spending cuts is to get the economy moving, boosting growth. Obviously, it's quite a good slogan there. We'll be expecting more details from Rachel Reeves when she gives this speech to policy makers and industry leaders later on today. Another part of this, and perhaps I suppose you could say another central pillar of Labour's plan, is to unlock the planning system. We've seen for a long time developments being snarled up, Labour pledging to build 1.5 million new homes, and actually the Labour Party under Rachel Reeves, here's the Chancellor, planning to reimpose house building targets on local councils. Now, that's something that's been unpopular with people obviously who live in many areas, developments being snarled up, Labour making it clear they want to break through that logjam. And attracting investment. You've seen the Labour Party pledging to create a national wealth fund, really seeking to bring private capital on board and to direct that funding towards some of Labour's key policy areas. Clean energy is one of them, and obviously this planning reform as well.
And Alex, there has been a policy blitz from Starmer and his team just since Friday. Get us up to speed on what's managed to be worked through by this new leadership.
Well, Tom, I was with you on Friday. Neither of us really got much sleep, did we, watching the election? Neither did these guys, the new government. And in fact, the King, his first words to Keir Starmer were, "You must be exhausted." Still, that doesn't seem to have stopped the new cabinet from really hitting the ground running. Keir Starmer is on a 4-nation tour of the UK. He's in Belfast in Northern Ireland today to meet policymakers there. Meanwhile, David Lammy, the new Foreign Secretary, he went on a whistle-stop tour of Germany, taking a quick break to watch England's penalty shootout, worth saying, then went over to Poland and Sweden, and the Defence Secretary making a trip, that's Jonathan Healey, the new Defence Secretary, making a trip to Kyiv to both announce new support for Ukraine and that support pledged in April would be expedited. You're seeing here, I think, a sense that Labour are wanting to communicate they're going to get on with their mission of change as fast as possible. I suppose you could say Starmer and his team are trying to show they're in a hurry and there's no time to be lost.
OK, Alex Morgan, excellent update in terms of the politics of the UK, the priorities, of course, of this new government, carving out some time for that important penalty shootout, of course, for England. Thank you very much. OK, I'm going to get you up to speed on some of the top stories of the day. The UK's new business secretary is to demand that jobs are saved at Tata Steelworks in Port Talbot in Wales in exchange for state support for the industry. Jonathan Reynolds told the BBC that both he and Prime Minister Keir Starmer have already spoken to Tata Steel over the company's plan to shut down its blast furnaces in a move that could cost some 2,800 jobs. And Paramount Global, the parent of CBS and MTV, has agreed to merge with Skydance Media, handing control of a major Hollywood studio to independent producer David Ellison. The deal ends one of the messiest and most dramatic mergers in recent history. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is set to meet China's leader in Beijing, fresh from his controversial sit-down with Russia's Vladimir Putin. Orban's Moscow visit was part of what he describes as a peace mission, which triggered condemnation from the European Union leaders who said he had no mandate to represent the bloc on matters like the war in Ukraine. And Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will visit Russia on Monday for the first time in 5 years. He's set to meet with President Vladimir Putin during the visit. Russia is India's biggest supplier of weapons and oil, but has been drawing closer to China, with relations between New Delhi and Beijing under strain since 2020. Coming up, French bond futures slip, the euro dips on a surprise victory for the leftist alliance in parliamentary elections here in France. More market reaction. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. Now, French bond futures slipped and the euro dipped as traders digested the results of France's legislative elections that showed a surprise victory for the leftist alliance. Jeffrey Yu, a senior strategist at Bank of New York Mellon, says based on the results, risks of expansionary fiscal policy remain and perhaps on the margins have picked up. Well, let's get another take and bring in Douglas Yates, professor and member of the academic committee at the American Graduate School here in Paris. Douglas, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the rooftop here on this. It is historic. It's an unprecedented moment for France as they work through the results, the implications of this vote. What was your top take on what we saw unfold yesterday?
Well, surprise. I think all of this week people had been preparing for a Rassemblement National victory, and in the end, Macron won his gamble. He won his bet.
National, the RN, the National Rally of Marine Le Pen.
That's right.
And that didn't happen.
I think everyone was preparing for what it would be like to have Jordan Bardella as Prime Minister and Marine Le Pen waiting in the background. Bardella claimed that the electioneering had cheated the French people, but Marine Le Pen said our time will come. So she's saying our victory has only been deferred. We are waiting for upcoming presidential and legislative elections in a few years. In the meantime, Macron has won a reprieve. He does appear to be a very clever strategist. He's played the same game 3 times in a row. In the first round, he attacks the 2 extremes, and in the second round, he builds a front against the Rassemblement National, the Front Républicain, and that strategy worked like a charm.
Yeah, it looked last week like the Republican front was really being questioned, whether it would have come back and hold back the National Rally, and it's come to the fore again. Well, there's a lot to unpack there, including your line that Macron has turned out to be a good strategist. I want to get more on that. But for the here and now, in terms of the potential, because watching it unfold yesterday on French TV was fascinating, and the anchors asking the different party leaders, who are you going to partner with? What are you going to do? What's going to happen next? What is going to happen next? What are the potential combinations that could actually form some kind of government here?
This is the 3rd round of a 2-round election. So since everyone basically voted against the Rassemblement National, they didn't vote for anything. There's not really any common policy. And so the problem is the problem of an alliance. Mélenchon, the leader of the extreme left party, came on first on the television and declared that Gabriel Attal, the prime minister, should step down and Macron should appoint someone from the front. And he sort of suggested it should be him. The problem is 85% of French reject the idea that he should be the prime minister. And so the other partners, the socialists, the Greens, the communists on the left who had been in that coalition might migrate to get the votes they need in the center. And so too with the Republicans. To construct a majority, they need 289 seats. Mélenchon, his party personally, has only 75.
So you could carve out Mélenchon. Some would describe their policies as extreme left, from France Unbowed, part of the New Popular Front coalition. You could carve him out, isolate him and his group, and partner maybe with the Socialists, the Greens, maybe bring in some Republicans with Macron's team, and then you'd have a significant majority. What is the likelihood of that, though? What are the challenges, and what do you expect the market and the economic implications of a formulation like that to be?
All right, so the market's going to respond, first of all, to the uncertainty. A Mélenchon government would send a message to the market that would be largely negative, because if he were to try to implement his program, it would involve things like lowering the retirement age back to 60 years, increasing minimum wage to 1,600 euros a month, a variety of new expenditures. And so the current Minister of Finance has indicated this would be catastrophic for French public finance, and therefore the markets that are lending to France would probably take advantage of that.
Just when do we get an answer in terms of some of these potential combinations? What's the time frame? And then where does this all leave Macron?
Okay, so on the 18th of July, a nomination is supposed to be made. In between now and then, Gabriel Attal has promised he would announce his resignation, but will remain in the office. Ironically, a pizza man joked that Gabriel Attal could stay prime minister if there's no majority to oust him with a vote of censure. What we're looking for is possibly someone who's a woman, someone who is not threatening to Macron, and someone who's on the winning side who's willing to migrate to Macronist. So I'll take a spin of the wheel and suggest the head of the Green Party, Ms. Tondelier, as a possible prime minister.
And meanwhile, Macron goes off to the NATO summit in Washington, and you say this has turned out better for him than many would have expected.
Everyone's been predicting nothing but his loss, blaming him for a bad bet, and he's done it a 3rd time. He's managed to win, although a minority of French support his policies.
Really, really fascinating insights and analysis of what's unfolded here in France. Douglas Yates, thank you very much indeed. Professor and member of the Academic Committee at the American Graduate School here in Paris, thank you. You can watch, of course, Bloomberg's coverage of the French parliamentary election results and market reaction with top guests throughout the morning. We're going to get insights from Tycho Kandrim and the Jacques Delors Institute and Edmond de Rothschild as well. Plenty more coming up. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. We check in, of course, the market reaction to what has unfolded here in France, which has taken most people, quite frankly, by surprise. It wasn't the national rally that came in top. In fact, it was the new Popular Front, the coalition, fairly unwieldy coalition of leftist groups, including, by the way, the Communists, France Unbowed and the Socialists, who came in top. Macron's party coming number 2, and then the national rally of Marine Le Pen coming 3rd. The pressure then, of course, you're starting to see that in terms of the sovereign debt of France. JP Morgan saying that investors will demand a premium to German bonds, given the policy focus of this leftist coalition on higher spending, up to 120 billion, some suggesting even more per year is what would cost, in terms of euros, what would it cost to push through some of those policies. We're still at the stage where we're trying to make up what the future government is going to look like here in France, but certainly given the clout of this leftist coalition, there is a focus, there is concern in some quarters about the constraints then on the debt of France. So we look at OATs and, of course, what's happening with the euro. Let's flip the board and look at inflation and that story out of the US. We have the data dropping on Thursday in terms of CPI. And in terms of the headline basis, year on year, you're expected that inflation story to continue to ease. 3.1% year on year is the expected number, down from 3.3%. This is the June number that we're expecting. Core, though, is expected to remain around 3.4%. Let's also remind you and flip the board, this is a big week in terms of the earnings season. You've got the likes of JP Morgan, Citigroup and Wells kicking off the earnings story. This chart showing the value of those S&P companies coming through with the earnings kicking off at the end of this week with a focus, of course, on the banking space, JP Morgan, Citigroup and Wells. There is plenty more coming up. Opening trade will continue to scrutinise the French story and the market impact. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.